Welcome to Truth Watchers. I'm Heath Henning. This episode is adapted from a portion of my book, I'm Not a Muslim Because I Read the Quran, pages 92 through 106. Now let us redirect our attention briefly to an early apocrypha text known as the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. This is distinct from the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. This apocryphal work, originating from a later date than the canonical Gospels, contains an account wherein the young child Jesus, at the age of 5, is described as making birds from clay and animating them. The narrative unfolds as follows, quote, "This child Jesus, when 5 years old, was playing in the ford of a mountain stream, and he collected the flowing water into pools and made them clear immediately, and by a word alone he made them obey him. And having made some soft clay, he fashioned out of it 12 sparrows. And it was the Sabbath when he did these things. And there were also many other children playing with him. And a certain Jew, seeing what Jesus was doing, playing on the Sabbath, went off immediately and said to his father Joseph, Behold, your son is at the stream, and has taken clay and made of it 12 birds, and has profaned the Sabbath. And Joseph, coming to the place and seeing, cried out to him, saying, Why do you do on the Sabbath what is not lawful to do? Jesus clapped his hands and cried out to the sparrows and said to them, Off you go. And the sparrows flew and went off crying. And the Jews, seeing this, were amazed and went away and reported to their chief men what they had seen Jesus doing." Unquote. A condensed version of a similar narrative is also presented in the Arabic Infancy Gospel of our Savior, paragraph 36, and it can be read in the Ante-Nicene Fathers, volume 8, page 412. The Quran reiterates a similar narrative resembling the apocryphal story in Surah 3, verse 45 through 49. Quote, "When the angel said, O Mary, surely Allah gives you the good news with a word from him. His name is Christ, Isa, son of Mary, exalted in this world and in the hereafter, and of the nearer. And he will speak to the people from the cradle and in his old age. And of the good, she said, Lord, how can I have a son when no man has touched me? He said, Likewise, Allah creates what he will. When he makes a command, so he surely only says to it, Be, so it will be. And he will teach him the book and the wisdom and the Torah and the gospel and a messenger to the children of Israel. Indeed, I came to you with a sign from your Lord. I create for you the figure of a bird from the clay. So I breathe into it, so it will become a bird by Allah's permission. And I heal the blind and the leper, and I raise the dead by Allah's permission. And I inform you about what you eat and what you store in your houses. Surely in this is a sign for you if you were believers." Unquote. First, note that the Quran presents the idea that Christ will speak from the cradle, a concept reminiscent of the certain late-dated Christian apocryphal work. This theme is further addressed in Surah 19, verses 26 through 30. The verses recount Mary's interaction with her people after the birth of Jesus. Quote, "So if you see any human, so say, Surely I have vowed a fast to the merciful, so I will not talk to any human today." So she came to her people with him, carrying him. They said, "O Mary, indeed, you have brought a strange thing. O sister of Aaron, your father was not an evil man, and your mother was not unchaste." So she pointed to him. They said, "How can we talk with him who was in the cradle, an infant?" He said, "Surely I am the servant of Allah. He gave me the book and made me a prophet." Unquote. These verses narrate Mary's response to her people's astonishment upon seeing her with the infant Jesus. Mary, adhering to the vow of silence, signals to Jesus when the people express surprise at her actions. The people, perplexed by the presence of Mary's virgin-born infant, speak derogatory towards her. In response, Jesus speaks from the cradle, affirming his status as the servant of Allah, emphasizing that Allah has granted him the book and bestowed prophethood upon him. This act is presented as a sign, as stated in the Surah 349, aligning with other miraculous events such as talking infant and Jesus creating birds from clay and imbuing them with life. These occurrences, deemed as signs, diverge significantly from the types of signs found in the Bible, introducing a distinctive element into the narrative adapted from late apocryphal accounts. The passage concludes with the assertion that these events serve as signs for believers, emphasizing the requirement for belief in these occurrences as factual within the Quranic framework. The concept of being a believer in the Quran necessitates acceptance of these events as actual historical incidences. In this passage, specifically Surah 19, verse 28, once again we encounter historical blunders in the Quran previously mentioned. Mary is referred to as the sister of Aaron, the older brother of Moses, making Mary the sister of Moses, leading to the identification of Mary with Miriam of the Old Testament, who chronologically lived 1400 years apart in real history. The conflation of these figures points to a chronological discrepancy within the Quranic narrative, revealing the text historically inaccurate. In Surah 66, verse 12, it becomes evident that Muhammad perceived Mary as the sister of Moses. The verse states, quote, "And Mary, the daughter of Imran, who guarded her private parts, so we breathed into it from our spirit, and she believed in the words of her Lord and his books, and she was among the obedient," unquote. Here, Mary is referred to the daughter of Imran, the Arabic counterpart for the Hebrew name Amram. This aligns with a biblical lineage found in 1 Chronicles 6:3, which lists the children of Amram as Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. The consistency of this historical misidentification is evident throughout the Quran, emphasizing a substantial chronological discrepancy. Beyond highlighting the confusion in chronology, this verse raises another significant point. It implies that Allah impregnated the Virgin Mary by breathing into her private parts from his spirit. This act leads to Mary conceiving, which in turn poses a theological question. Despite the Quran's insistence that Allah has no son, the narrative implies a divine intervention in Mary's pregnancy. The discrepancy between the Quranic claim of Allah having no son and the involvement of Allah in Mary's conception becomes a theological paradox that warrants further exploration, which we will not discuss today. In Surah 3, verses 35 through 36, the Quran introduces another passage that contributes to the distortion of the chronology surrounding Mary. The verse states, quote, "When the wife of Imran said, 'My Lord, I vow to you that what is in my belly is to be devoted to you, so accept it from me, surely you are the hearing, the knowing.' So when she had given birth to her, she said, 'My Lord, surely I have declared her a female, and Allah knows of what I have birthed, and the male is not like the female. And I have named her Mary, and I seek refuge for her and for her offspring from the regime, Satan," unquote. In this passage, the wife of Imran, Mary's mother, vows to dedicate her unborn child to Allah, expressing her commitment to this vow upon learning of her pregnancy. After giving birth to Mary, she acknowledges Mary's gender and names her, seeking refuge for Mary and her offspring from Satan. The mention of Imran here aligns with the previous passages, consistently referring to Mary as the daughter of Imran and reinforcing the confusion of the biblical figures of Amram, Moses, and Miriam. This repetition emphasizes the persistent historical error within the Quranic narrative regarding Mary's familial lineage. The subsequent verses of this passage delve deeper into the implications of this historical error and its relevance within the broader context of the Quranic narrative. The subsequent verse, Surah 3:37, articulates, quote, "So her Lord accepted her with a good acceptance and planted her a good planting. And Zechariah," referring to Zechariah, "took responsibility for her, and every time Zechariah entered into her in the mihrab, he found that she had provision. He said, "O Mary, where did this come from?" She said, "It is from Allah. Surely Allah provides for whom He will without counting." Unquote. This verse narrates the circumstances wherein Mary is given refuge in the Mihrab at the behest of her mother to shield her from Satan. Zechariah, a priest, vigilantly monitors her well-being and observes the miraculous provision of her necessities. The focal point of this passage revolves around elucidating the nature of the Mihrab and identifying the persona of Zechariah. The term Mihrab, as explicated by Usama Dakdok in a footnote, is defined as, quote, "Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple." Upon a comparative examination of various translations of the Quran, the prevalent rendering includes sanctuary and chamber. Safi Kaskas employs the term inner sanctuary, while Muhammad Sarar and Muhammad Taqi Usmani both interpret it as a place of worship. T.B. Irving and N.J. Daywood opt for shrine, and several other more ambiguous alternatives can be found in different versions. Undoubtedly, these diverse interpretations affirm a connection to the temple in some capacity. However, it is noteworthy that if Mary is to be considered the sister of Moses, historical chronology poses a challenge to this connection, as the construction of the temple did not commence until the 4th year of Solomon's reign, estimated to be in April or May of 967 BC. This Quranic tradition finds its roots in the ancient apocryphal text titled the Proto-Evangelium of James, which is available in the Ante-Nicene Fathers, Volume 8, pages 361 through 367. According to this narrative, Mary's parents are identified as Joachim and Anna. At the age of 3, Mary is said to have been taken up residence in the temple, where she received sustenance from the hands of angels. The apocryphal account maintains that Mary was raised in the quote-unquote Holy of Holies, according to paragraph 13, a notion that diverges from historical realities, as documented by Josephus and the Mishnah. Contrary to the apocryphal tradition, historical records depict a more restricted access for women within the temple precinct. The descriptions provided by Josephus in Against Apion, Book 2, verses 103 through 105, and the Mishnah, Kalim 1:8, delineate varying levels of sanctity as one moves from the outer temple precinct towards the temple proper. Women, in accordance with these historical sources, were confined to the court of women, with exclusive entry into the Holy of Holies reserved for the high priest, and that too only once a year. The historical foundation upon which the Quran is predicated contains historical inaccuracies. More importantly, in alignment with the chronological framework presented in the Quranic narrative, it is evident that the construction of the temple had not yet taken place at the time of Mary's birth, if she is indeed the daughter of Imran, sister of Moses. In the Quranic narrative, the figure identified as Zechariah corresponds to Zechariah, acknowledged as the father of John the Baptist in biblical literature. Consider Luke 1:5 through 9, verse 13, verses 18 through 20, and compare that with the Quran, Surah 338 through 41. A notable incongruity arises when considering Luke's account, which places Zechariah's life during the era of Herod the Great in Luke 1:5. Furthermore, the Gospels, in conjunction with Josephus, attribute the death of John the Baptist to the son of Herod. This incongruence between the Quranic chronology and all historical evidence is unmistakable. The placement of Mary and Zechariah's narratives 1400 years subsequent to the time of Moses, as indicated in the Quran, is contradicted by biblical and all historical sources. The Quran's inaccuracy in temporally situating Jesus and related figures along Moses, stemming from Muhammad's misunderstanding of Mary, the mother of Jesus, as Maryam, the sister of Moses, stands in a conspicuous illustration of the Quran's inability to pass the test of divine authorship. It is noteworthy that followers of Islam often accept the Quran as the literal word of Allah without critically evaluating these historical discrepancies. The proceeding discourse on dating historical figures predominantly relied on biblical chronologies. Hence, in this section, we will introduce established secular dates to underscore the Quran's historical narrative's lack of scholarly acceptance. The esteemed historical analysis of William Durant, a scholar not inclined towards biblical sympathies, establishes dates for significant biblical figures and events such as Israel's presence in Egypt spanning from 1650 BC to 1220 BC, while Durant remains skeptical of Professor Garstang's findings, which places Moses around 1447 BC, with the fall of Jericho approximately 1400 BC. He acknowledges these dates. Durant assigns the year 444 BC to Ezra, marking an approximate date of the return from Babylonian captivity. Regarding the birth of Jesus Christ, Durant places it in 4 BC, aligning with the reference of the days of Herod in Matthew 2:1 and Luke 1:5, and he identifies Herod's death in 3 BC based on this correlation. Durant further highlights Luke's dating, suggesting that Christ's birth could be situated in 2 or 1 BC, aligning with his being 30 years old during Tiberius's 15th year of reign, according to Luke 3:1 through 3 and verse 23. This later date aligns with modern chronologies that have reconsidered earlier historical readings of Josephus, correcting the placement of Herod's death to 1 BC. The evolving perspective among Christian scholars has prompted a reconsideration of the prevailing secular consensus. Acknowledging that Josephus' reference to a lunar eclipse shortly before Herod's death and a subsequent Passover festival after his death only provides a narrow window of 29 days between these events under the earlier consensus dating the eclipse to March 13th, 4 BC. This limited time frame appears insufficient to accommodate the sequence of events documented by Josephus during Herod's final days. By considering the eclipse on January 10th, 1 BC, a more reasonable 89 days interval is afforded between the eclipse and the subsequent Passover of that year. Peter Richardson, in his book Herod, King of the Jews and Friend of the Romans, set Herod's life spanning from 73 BC to 4 BC. Herod minted coins, as did his descendants, making indisputable dates for their historical setting. Herod the Great is well established within historical settings due to his many building projects and other artifacts left behind for archaeologists to discover, including the Herodian extension of the Jewish temple, which was still in construction throughout Jesus' lifetime. The Herodian temple is a place where Zechariah served as a priest in Luke 1:8 through 21, also in Surah 3:37 of the Quran, during the reign of Herod, according to Luke 1:5. Zechariah's son, John the Baptist, or Yahya, as he is referred to in the Quran, is referred to in Surah 3:38 through 41, as well as Luke 1:5 through 9, verse 13, verses 18 through 20. John the Baptist, Yahya, met his demise at the hands of Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great. Jesus Christ met his demise at the hands of Pontius Pilate, a fact well documented in historical sources beyond the New Testament. Josephus acknowledged Pilate's condemnation of Christ to the cross, as did the Roman Cornelius Tacitus. Others noting Christ's death by crucifixion, including the Syriac record of Mara bar Serapion, Lucian of Samosata, along with the Babylonian Talmud, and extant evidence of Roman archives. These sources not only offer insight into the dating of Christ's life during the time of Pontius Pilate was governor in Judea, AD 26 through 36, but also corroborating the historical fact of his death, a stark contrast to the Quran's attempt to deny Jesus was killed. Suetonius provides additional context for these dates in conjunction with the Roman archives when he mentions the expulsion of the Jews from Rome, a reference also found in the book of Acts 18 verse 2. Philo, a Jew from Alexandria, Egypt, offers circumstantial evidence of Pilate living in the first century, as he wrote a letter of complaint against Pilate to Emperor Gaius. Modern scholars have consistently placed the birth of Jesus Christ within the range of 6 to 2 BC and his death between AD 30 and 33. Numerous sources affirm the existence of Moses, the exodus of Egypt, and the establishment of the Jewish settlement in Israel centuries before the first century life of Jesus. The Dead Sea Scrolls, comprising Hebrew scriptures, pseudepigrapha, and sectarian texts, are dated centuries prior to the first century, providing evidence of Moses' historical antiquity. The Greek historian Herodotus lived 484 to 425 BC, acknowledged the origin of the Jewish nation through the crossing of the Red Sea. Additionally, documents from Egypt, the Hittites, the Assyria, and other ancient Near Eastern cultures mentions Israel, extending their historical narratives well before Herodotus. Even Shabir Ahmed, a Muslim translator of the Quran, in his comment on Surah 26, verse 59 of the Quran, dated, quote, the time of David and Solomon about 940 BC, unquote. If Israel emerged as a nation subsequent to the exodus from Egypt, and it endured as a nation for centuries prior to the birth of Jesus Christ, then it is evident that there are many centuries spanning between the periods of Jesus and Moses. Early Christian authors referenced Moses to emphasize his great antiquity, and chronologies predating Muhammad's birth further substantiating the significant time span between Moses and Jesus. The Jewish chronology of Seder Olam, chapter 5, dates the Exodus in the Jewish year of 2448 from creation, being equivalent to 1312 or 1311 BC. The historical sources predating the Quran provide precise historical records debunking the unfounded assertion within the Quran that portrays Jesus as the nephew of Moses. The alternative argument for a Muslim's defense would require suggesting that Moses lived in the first century BC, thereby situating the Exodus out of Egypt during the reign of Herod the Great, a distortion that would further compound historical inaccuracy. Those committed to acknowledging the factual history are compelled to dismiss the Quranic narrative completely. This has been an excerpt from my book, I Am Not a Muslim Because I Read the Quran. And this is Heath Henning. Thank you for tuning into Truth Watchers podcast. Remember to hit the subscribe button and share it with a friend for more fascinating facts. Check us out at truthwatchers.com because sound apologetics and exegesis of scriptures is important for all of God's children, as it is indicated in 3 John verse 4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth.